This is the BYD eMax 7, or as I like to call it, the van that nobody saw coming. Because why would you see it coming? It's a van. A van that costs 30 lakh rupees, and for 30 lakhs you would expect to get fireworks and red carpets. What you get is silence. Not just from the large group of people turning their heads to look at the extremely interesting design, but also from the lack of an engine. Sounds bad, yes, but the kilometer-long wires and the complicated motor and the blade battery have totaled up to 310 Newton meters, which is good, and 204 horsepower, which is great. But that's not what you'd see this coming for, because while it may well be faster than an Innova, that's no benchmark for speed. Where you might see this coming though is the highway. Because it gets 520 kilometers of NEDC range, which in IRL is more like 480 to 500 kilometers, which is still respectable, and enough to go from Pune to Goa and still have just enough juice left to find your friends who've, of course, lost their way to the beach. And once you find them, they'll find out that the eMax 7 is fairly comfortable in the back. There's 6 and 7-seater options. We had the latter bench setup, and though comfy, we'd still pick the captain seats. By the way, since the eMax's wheelbase is longer than that of an Innova Krista, though shorter than a Hycross, third row access might not be great, but it is more than usable for shorter journeys, even for adults. The ride is comfortable too, so your friends or your passengers won't really have a frown on their face every time you go through some bumps, and you won't have one either when you start to poke around the cabin. Sure, there's some classically curious stuff like the regen modes, which are standard and larger, or the MID, which is hopelessly complicated for such a small place that you really can't tell what information is being sent to you. The IRVM is plasticky and flimsy. The AC controls are all on this display, and yes, the plastic quality overall is not great, but where the E6, this thing's predecessor, felt cheap, this feels acceptable. The rotating screen is cool, there's an NFC keycard available, the ADAS suite is a neat addition, and wireless CarPlay is always welcome. But none of this would ever convince anyone to buy this over an Innova. The only reason anyone would take this over an Innova is if they were getting paid for it. Not paying, but paying less at the very least. So how much lesser can you expect to pay? Well, if not great at maths, we've done the math for you, and it basically works out that the BYD eMax 7 is going to be about 1/4 or 1/3 the cost based on just propulsion alone, and you can expect to save between 1 to 1.7 lakh rupees a year. And yes, that's only based on fuel and of course electricity costs. That will vary based on driving conditions, and you will save extra based on service and spares because EVs are typically cheaper to service. Now, usually it takes a few years to break even on an EV car versus an ICE car because of the higher upfront costs of EVs. But thanks to BYD's fantastic pricing, the savings over something like an Innova Hycross hybrid can start from day one when you take the higher spec variants of the eMax 7 into account. And even when you take the lower spec variants into account, you can compare it to an Innova Krista and yes, start saving money from day one. Personally, I'd still pick an Innova because of just the peace of mind of the entire ownership experience and the endless life cycles of the things. But if running costs are a thing of concern for you, then turn around and take a look at the van that nobody saw coming, the BYD eMax 7. Okay, so we've been driving the eMax 7 for a bit now, and I actually like it. It's it's nothing to write home about except the ride quality, which is fantastic, and the range. Mostly when companies tell you 520 kilometers of range, you're going in expecting about 400, 420, 430. But literally, I switched on the car at the hotel this morning. It was fully charged, of course, and it said 528 kilometers, which is even more than promised. And then, of course, the next thing you're thinking is it's going to plummet down every time you start driving hard, but it actually hasn't. We've had this car sitting idle for a while, just running on AC and, taking some statics and stuff. and range would usually drop a lot in that case because of course you're not doing any kilometers and kilowatts are going, so you would expect it. But we've done about 100 kilometers already, including fast driving for the shoots and that place where the car was parked for an hour and a half with the AC running, all the systems running, and I still have over 360 kilometers of range left, and I'm not driving for range. So the range and the ride quality are two standout things for this car. The third thing is that it's actually really nice on the highway as well. I'm doing about 70 kilometers per hour and I'm in eco mode actually, and there's a car in front. If I go in to overtake it, I'm already at 90, 100. So it picks up speed very quickly, and the great thing is it doesn't die down very aggressively. You can do 120, and on private closed roads you can also get up to 100, 140, 160, and has a claim top speed of 180, and I'm sure it can get there fairly easily. So the performance is there, the ride quality is there, and it's just a nice car to drive. The only thing is, like I said in the video, I don't know how many people will spend their money on this compared to an Innova Hycross, especially people buying this car for themselves. If you're buying it for a fleet or for a cab service, then of course running costs are a big concern, and like I said, then this does make sense. But for most private buyers, I do think the Innova Hycross is just a no-brainer, right? Like the Innova name, the Toyota brand name, the brand value. Yeah, it's sad that there is such a monopoly in that segment, but all the good for the Innova. I mean, it's made that reputation over the years, and I think it's great. But just the BYD eMax 7, it's a surprisingly pleasant, nice car to drive. And if you're looking in this space, I definitely think it's at the very least, worth a test drive. Definitely go check it out and see what you think.